Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Well, John, it's time that we get another episode of the 3 Down Greencast. Cracking.
Oh,
that's
what?
awful, wasn't it?
That's like, I'm the dad here. I should be the one making dad jokes like that.
You know what? I don't think you have to actually be a dad to make dad jokes, do you?
Well, you just proved that you don't, because that was an A+ level of dad joke there, Joel. So well done. I applaud you, but I'm holding my microphone right by my face because I still haven't gotten a proper mic like you.
Well, I mean, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of thought about that one for a little bit. It didn't just come to me as we sat here talking about nothing before we officially start talking about nothing and put it on the 3 Down Nation Greencast on 3downnation.com.
Take a drink for every time Joel just said 3 Down Nation in that intro.
Woo! We're getting drunk.
Speaking of drinks, what is the beer of choice tonight, Joel?
Well, so, you know, it's kind of the season right now. Everyone knows I love my IPAs. I'm coming around on sour beers. I love a good brown ale. But you know what? When the temperature rises and it's stinking hot like it is today, I don't know what it was like in Saskatoon, but down here it was really windy, but it was still really hot and kind of annoying, frankly. Because, yes, I'm that guy. I complain about the heat, but I don't complain about the cold, so deal with it.
No, that's true. I have never heard you complain about the cold.
Anyway, so when that happens, you know what? Sometimes I just want a beer that, frankly, tastes like beer. So courtesy my good friend Mike Torrey at a Parallel 49 Parallel distribution, I got a nice craft lager from Parallel 49. And what do you got, John?
Well, I'm coming off of, I have to put back on all the calories I just burned off playing shinny for an hour and a half. So much to your recommendation, and more love for Rebellion, I'm going with the Rebellion IPA, which the can is very eye-catching, I must admit.
The design work in all those cans done by like tattoo artists in the area, all their cans just look amazing.
Oh, it's incredible. You have biplanes fighting Godzilla by a grain elevator. It's delightful. It's tasty in my mouth. And I love a good IPA all the time, especially after a skate in my quite cold air-conditioned basement. But I'm not going to complain about that either.
Absolutely not. And I'm glad I made the choice I did on the beer because there's a couple lentil creams sitting in my fridge that I almost decided to take one of those, but then we would have been unofficially brought to you by Rebellion Brewing again, which this isn't a thing. This isn't actually happening. But again, Mark, I mean, if you're listening, we'll keep talking about you if you want to help us out a bit here. I'm just
do it. Do it. That's all we ask. Just do it. Just this is proof we will work for beer.
I mean, it's almost just as good as getting paid, isn't it?
Basically. I have a real job now, so I can work for beer from time to time.
Beer is pretty expensive, so it's practically money. If you get free beer, you could, quote-unquote, not resell it and make a killing, right?
Could you sell it on Kijiji? Is that a thing you can do? Like, if we got free beer from Rebellion, not that I ever would, could you hypothetically sell it on Kijiji?
I feel like the SLGA would come at you hard for that one.
Yeah, probably. Well, there goes my master plan of monetizing this podcast. I guess it's back to working for free.
You're just going to have to live with that for at least another week, John. So anyway, enough of that nonsense. We got basically 2 things we're going to talk about on this podcast in kind of a broader sense. We're going to get into training camp in a second because that smell, football is in the air. It's right around the corner. We can't wait. But after that, we have to talk about Darian Durant. Basically, everything under the sun has been said and written about him over the last little while, but we're going to have to talk about him anyway because he's kind of a big deal around here.
Yeah, naturally. And a lot of upset Bomber fans, including yours truly. Of course, not hiding the fact I am a Winnipeg Blue Bomber fan living in Saskatchewan reporting on the Riders. But needless to say, I'm not quite as salty as others. But there's a little bit of the salt going on.
Yeah, it's understandable, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But first, Training camp opens this weekend at Griffith Stadium in Saskatoon, as it has for the last number of years. Just basically the perfect facility for training camp. No one gets to go home at night. Everyone gets to hang out together. They get treated well. They have all the right facilities. They have everything. So it makes sense that they keep bringing it up this year, every year. Plus the whole provincial team, blah 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 blah. So the question is, what is the thing to watch at this training camp? I have a piece. It's probably up on 3 Down Nation now by the time this podcast makes the website. Believe it or not, all the contributors are actually organized this week. Drew sent out an email with an update and everything, and he was asking for a season preview update, training camp preview stories, and for some reason it all got us in line and we all wrote them, so they're all planned for the rest of the week. So unless Justin Dunk has the biggest scoop of the century tomorrow and all hell breaks loose, you'll probably see it on 3downnation.com at about the same time as this podcast comes out.
And dunk bombs are a thing. They can happen at any time and unexpectedly. He can just dunk on our plans.
This podcast is actually brought to you by Dad Jokes. If that was a thing, if Dad Jokes was a company that had money, I think they would probably have the lowdown on this episode.
Rebellion beer and dad jokes. Booyah.
Anyway, so the way this camp is shaping up to me, the way it's likely going to look is, number one, and we'll start with this. Number one, is Zach Collaros going to be the quarterback that they expect him to? I don't think there's any question that, given the money they've given him, that he's going to be the starting quarterback for this team, or he's going to be given the opportunity, at least, to be the starting quarterback for this team. So, will he adapt to the system that they have with Stephen McAdoo? Will he be able to withstand the grind of camp and the grind of the season? And, just what will this team look like with Zach Collaros? And yes, it's the easy storyline because it's the most important position in football, but, it is one that has to be answered in the next few weeks.
He will adapt to the system. I think he's going to do just fine in the Stephen McAdoo system. I think he will come out of training camp as a starting quarterback, but like Zach Collaros always seems to do, I think at some point this year he's going to get hurt, and I feel like this has put just a tiny chip on Brandon Bridges' shoulder. This is a guy who's got some NFL aspirations down the road, has proven he can at least compete at this level, and I think bringing in Zach Collaros is going to motivate him even further. So we're going to have the very first bold prediction of the year. I think Collaros is going to go down for even, say, a 3 or 4 game stretch. Bridge will come back in, and once again, there will be quarterback controversy in Saskatchewan. Because I feel like Bridge will come in, play well for a few games, show some of the form he showed in that weird platoon situation with Kevin Glenn last year, where Kevin started, played a series, and Bridge would go out and win the game. I think that typical Collaros injury is going to leave him out of the lineup and open the door for Brandon Bridge late in the season. But coming out of camp, I think Zach Collaros will be the number one guy, and I think a large reason of that is the fact that he is a veteran guy. They trust him, and they paid him a whole boatload of money to come in and be that guy.
Yeah, number one is obviously always going to be the money. If you give the guy the reported money that he's getting, you're not going to say, okay, you're the backup, go sit down, unless it's truly, he's truly awful and there's nothing you can do about it at that point.
Yeah,
I think what Zach Collaros has going for him, and I said this in the piece, is, and I've said this before, and I think we've said this before too, he doesn't need to be 2015 MOP level Zach Collaros for this team to have success. We saw this team win a decent number of football games last year, frankly, with average quarterbacking. So all he needs to do is get the ball to Darian Carter, get the ball to Naaman Roosevelt, get the ball, I keep saying gall, keep getting the ball to these guys, and let them do their thing. It'll make his life easy, and he will look good. He'll say, hey, look, Zach Collaros is back. He's being a good quarterback, blah, 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 blah. But maybe all his passes are like 4 yards, and then Darian Carter runs for like 6. So, that's really all he has to do, and this team should be fine. Now, that's not saying that he shouldn't strive for more, that the team shouldn't hope that they see MOP level Zach Collaros, because if they do, it could cover up a lot of the other flaws that we might see on this team out of training camp at this point where we don't really have some answers.
No, absolutely. But I think, too, with Collaros, I think he's going to get a real dose of what it's like to be the quarterback in Saskatchewan this year, because we're talking about training camp. And, Joel, I can't really think of it. And you and I'll be the first to admit it, when I worked in radio, I dreaded training camp. Most people would say, oh, it's a lot of fun. You get to be outside, yada, yada, yada. A lot of years, you're just finding a way to retell the same story every 2 or 3 days, right? It almost seems like there's so little intrigue with this year's camp. I mean, I remember you and I were both covering this team a couple years ago when, it seemed like every second day we were both, doing stories on will Dan Clark be the starting center for the Riders? Like, it was that.
Well, maybe
dry.
you did. I tried a little harder than you did.
Yeah, that's fair. You also made a lot more money than I did, and worked for a company that actually cared a lot more about your content than mine did, and gave you freedom. And okay, I'm gonna stop ranting right now because I still try to work for them.
That sound you hear is a bridge burning behind John Fraser.
Oh no, I burned that bridge with atomic fire on my way out. But needless to say, he's gonna get an introduction to. Could you imagine like the green zone and the sports cage? All the talk is going to be about a bunch of armchair quarterbacks sitting in the stands at Griffith Stadium, mapping out their own every single little pass that Collaros makes to 12th string receivers at some point. And he's going to get a real taste of what it's like to be the quarterback here in Saskatchewan. Now, that's not saying that Hamilton didn't care, because, I mean, Hamilton is very much a passionate fan-based market, but there's just something different about being here in Saskatchewan. I think Collaros will be prepared for it, but I think he's going to have you're going to have that random reporter show up half disheveled, ask him about being the starting quarterback about 4 days into training camp. After he's already been asked 102 times by the rest of the media that's there every single day.
And then he's going to turn to Jamie and I and say, "Great question," and then wink. That's an inside joke that you would have had to have been at camp a few years ago, and I don't really feel like telling that story right now. But anyway, I mean, that's a really good point. But I think at this point in his career, Zach Collaros is the professional. I think he understands. I mean, he's been around. He's been through this city before a few times. He's been around the block. I'm sure he talked to a lot of people as soon as he came here. Namely, I'm sure he knows like Darian Durant and Ricky Ray and all these guys that have been through this grind of this league and everything numerous times over. And I don't think that's really going to be a big issue for him. Will it be an adjustment? Sure. But I think he's going to get there.
Yeah, no. I would agree. I'm just more, I guess, in a roundabout way, too. I'm saying you asked off the top, what should we look for at this year's training camp? And I really can't think of any other real significant storylines. Maybe the running back battle. What are they going to do behind Jerome Messam? Maybe some offensive line stuff, but just nothing that's really going to capture the attention, right? Although I find it funny, as anybody from Saskatoon that's listened, and I think the city as a whole has done a really good job of like learning to stay away. Like now, I remember the first year at camp was here, and people would actually attend the walkthrough. And people would be there, and it's a bunch of guys in shorts wearing funny hats, not doing anything. So now, as we head into, many years later, it's funny, the walkthroughs were no longer attended, but practices were. So if you are going to training camp, if you are going to go watch or coming in from out of town, because, in fairness, it's a cool little experience to check out. I wouldn't go every day like some hardcores do, but it's fun. Bring the kids, check it out for an afternoon.
There's always chance. The biggest reason to go, unless you're a true football nerd, especially if you're bringing your kids, is to chat with the players and get an autograph after practice.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And the players are that is one thing with the Saskatchewan Roughriders players. I think everybody on this roster knows what they mean to this province, and they take the time to smile and take pictures and meet people by the fence and sign autographs. And I mean, heck, even the little things like they're soon going to be asking everybody in Saskatoon to borrow their bike so they can bike from their residence over to Griffith Stadium. So I'm
surprised that usually starts like a few weeks out. I'm surprised that hasn't even started yet, to be honest with you.
Maybe I've been too busy with my real job that I haven't been on Twitter a whole lot.
It's entirely possible that could be me too. But I think the best solution to that ever was Brendan Labatt and his old man scooter. That thing was amazing.
The Labatt mobile. Yeah. Oh, Brendan, I'll never forget being at training camp, and I was probably chatting with you and not watching practice, and seeing Brendan Labatt's old man's scooter that he didn't feel like biking, so he would jump on this old battery powered rascal and drive it from the residence over to practice, and the Labatt mobile was born.
And given his racing background, I believe he actually did a little bit of tweaking to it, because it was his grandfather's or something, and it was sitting around his property. And I remember doing the story with him about it, because it was kind of fun and it was kind of cool. But I think he actually did a little bit of work on that thing to get a little more power out of it than you would your average scooter, because that's a pretty big man that's being wheeled around on a thing that's meant for like a 95-year-old human being. But speaking of Brendan Labatt, I think the number 2 storyline for the offense is going to be the offensive line and how this is going to shake out, because on the conference call last week, Chris Jones almost left the door open to possibly playing only 2 Canadian offensive linemen in Dan Clark and Brendan Labatt, basically. So it sounds like Thaddeus Coleman's going to be a tackle. The other tackle is a spot that could be open, and so is a guard. So that leaves the door open still for Darius Bladdock and for them to go with 3. So I think overall, generally speaking, the talent is there. It's just where are people going to fall, and how do they really make the ratio work? And this kind of falls over in the defense as well, where it seems like, and we'll have to see on the first couple of days of practice, I can speak English properly, that Sam Hurl might not start a middle linebacker, as it was said last week that Sam McGuavin was going to play there, but he might actually start at will, which I don't know he's done a whole lot of in his career.
Yeah, again, he's a good as a guy that's watched a lot of Winnipeg football games the past few years. If you're counting on Sam Hurl to be a starter, that's not so good. So I think the Riders, their hand is going to be forced, and I think they are going to have to play the 3 offensive linemen, because I think
that's the best move. I think that's I honestly don't think any team in the CFL should ever start fewer than 3 Canadian offensive linemen, unless you just have stupid Canadian depth everywhere else.
Well, no, and I would agree, and the Riders don't have. If they were able to, bring back Enoch Mwamba, then you could start making that argument. But if you're looking at Sam Hurl as a starter, as a guy that's watched a lot of football, I can't picture him as a starter, even at will linebacker. Maybe he's a better fit there, but that might be the biggest hole in this Rider roster that I can think of heading into camp. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them, their hand will be forced to go into the 3 offensive linemen. Now, on top of that, we keep talking about the Canadian offensive linemen, and no real mention of Josiah St. John. Is this a make or break? Yeah.
Dave Rosa reference.
I liked it. Do you think this is going to be a make or break camp for former number 1 overall pick?
I don't know if it's a make or break camp per se, because he could have a great camp and make his way into the lineup and still mess the bed. So I feel like it always is that kind of year for Canadian talent, where at least highly regarded ones you expect to start, where it's kind of year 3 is where you figure out what they really are. And I feel like this is that year for Josiah St. John. Is he a starting offensive lineman in this league? Is he at least a rotational guy in this league? He's barely seen a sniff through 2 years. And year 1, we get it. He missed camp because of his agent and blah, 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 blah. But last year, you didn't really... we weren't to practice every day. We didn't really see it. But, I don't know. We still don't know what he is in year 3, and that's generally rare. Generally, you see year 3, you see, okay, we know he's at least this, but can he be this, or is he going to stay this, or drop down to this? Instead, we frankly we don't know what he is at this point, and this is weird.
And if Chris Jones is talking about a plan of potentially starting 2 Canadians and 2 very veteran Canadians along that offensive line, is he thinking the same thing? Maybe he's not so high on St. John.
Maybe. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but if you look, okay, so you go 2 there, and then you start Sam Hurl at will, and you start Jerome Messam at running back, but there's no one behind Messam. Is Cam Judge going to be anything yet? Is he going to stay with the team this year, whatever that was on Twitter last year? Like, I mean, there's still so many question marks behind those other guys that you almost have to get to the point where you have to start all three linemen. You start Sam Harrell and you start Messam, just so if one of them does get hurt, none of their backups that are Canadian have to play.
Yeah, no, exactly. Cameron Judge, there's another guy I kind of forgot about because we didn't see a whole lot of them last year. And again, this all goes back to what we say once an episode, so everybody finish your drinks. This team has done a pretty piss-poor job of drafting and developing talent.
Yeah, there's no way around it, and that's where this starts to rear its ugly head. We talked about it ad nauseum. They have the starters. Relatively speaking, you have at least 6 guys that you say are for sure. Then you have kind of a hodgepodge of other guys that can make up the 7th. So all of that works. After that, it's just the ratio is going to be tricky this year, and they're going to try to work it all out, I think, kind of between those 3 spots. You mix in a Spencer Moore every once in a while at fullback, and it goes from there. Unless someone like Bailey behind Rob Bagg steps up, and all of a sudden you can say, okay, we can start 2 Canadian receivers, but then a good American's going to have to sit, and where do you go from there? So it's a really convoluted situation where I don't envy Chris Jones on it, but he made his own bed here.
No, you're absolutely correct on that one there, Joel.
But, well, let's talk about some positives, because I always get ragged on about being Mr. Negative around here. And there's 3 strengths of this team going into this year, I think, when you go into training camp. Number 1, the receiving core is back from last year. It's stacked as ever. We've talked about the talent there. There's no question about it. But the interesting change for me, that where a strength has appeared on defense now, is along the defensive line. And we know the names there: Willie Jefferson, Zach Evans, Nick James, Charleston Hughes. They might actually be able to go with a 4-man front this year every down. And it's basically Chris Jones has his defensive line back that he had in Edmonton when they were so good defensively, and basically no quarterback stood a chance against them. So I'm not saying that defensive line is going to be that level, but at least they have the potential to finally maybe get some consistent pressure on the quarterback from someone not named Willie Jefferson this year. And that could make a huge difference for what could be a weak linebacking core, and maybe a very good, and could really help what's already a pretty good secondary get even better.
Well, and you said it, Joel. I mean, all that success that Chris Jones had in Edmonton, it started at the defensive line, and he finally has that here in Saskatchewan. So, or does he perhaps look at, and you see some teams starting to do with this, and maybe he rotates in his 3-man fronts, and much like he did last year, just keeps rotating guys. Defensive line's a hard position to play. He just keeps, keeping the bodies fresh, keeping them coming at the quarterback, keeping fresh legs out there. Like, either way, he's going to have options. He's going to have a pile of weapons, and you're right, that is an absolute strength of this football team. And I would say for the first time, that makes this team look a little like those Chris Jones teams in Edmonton. Again, he had some better players at middle linebacker, but yeah, it was all about pressure and pressure and pressure. And as we know, he's still heavily involved with that defense. I like the way that defensive line is looking.
Yeah, I think last year it's safe to say that the defense was the strength of this team, and it probably will be again this year. So there's a lot to look forward to in that front. So when we talk about some of the issues that this team is facing this year, some of the question marks that they have heading into this season, it's not to harp on the negative. It's the fact that every team in this league has questions. This isn't the Dynasty Eskimos where there was no cap and they could spend as much money as they wanted and
yeah, exactly.
Number 1 all-stars at every position and just dominate the league. When you live in a salary cap world, every team is going to have their question marks. Like right now, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have a pretty big question mark in their backup quarterback after the retirement of one Darian Durant. It kind of came out of nowhere this week, though I wrote on 3 Down Nation, maybe we should have seen it coming a little bit. Maybe not specifically now, but nothing about Darian Durant's career ever truly seemed normal. So why should his retirement have been normal?
Yeah, no, you're right. And it is a great piece. I think, and this is where I allude to, like, you got a lot of really salty Winnipeg Blue Bomber fans about the whole signing bonus and things like that. And I'll go on to that later. But first, Winnipeg was a team that basically came into this offseason and said, okay, We need somebody behind Matt Nichols. We can't have a 50% Matt Nichols playing again in a playoff game and getting absolutely thumped by the Edmonton Eskimos.
Mm-hmm.
The Winnipeg Blue Bombers have gone from having arguably some of the best quarterback depth in the league to some of the worst. I mean, you have Matt Nichols. I mean, they got rid of Dom Davis, who was their guy, was their third stringer for a couple of years, and now Darian Durant's sudden retirement, kind of really leaves them in a bind, especially this close to training camp. Now, the thing I don't like about it, and the thing that makes me partially salty as a Bombers fan, and first let me say, and I'm sure you would agree, Darian was maybe one of the best people for this province, and in dealing with him in the media was one of the absolute best. He was one of the few honest interviews you'd ever find. He gave you good quotes.
Yeah.
Even in a scrum, he was engaged. He knew the guys he was talking to. He had a good sense of humor about it. Darian was one of those guys that always made time for everybody. Fans, media. He didn't just blow you off with those, one line, I'm just here so I don't get fined. So I've always been a Darian supporter. But the timing of this, to sign with a team early in the offseason and then hit them a week before training camp is, to me, it's a black mark on an otherwise great career of Darian Durant. Signing bonus notwithstanding. But I mean, Joel, could you imagine a reality in which you tell an employer, yeah, I'll be there next week, and then post on social media or post through somebody else? I know there's a lot of he said in this, but to post on social media and say, yeah, actually, I'm not coming to that job that you're already paying me for next week. It just, it stinks, and there's a lot of vagaries, but I think if Darian wanted to keep his legacy intact and not leave on such a stinky note, he needed to make this decision earlier in the offseason. I'm even fine with him signing with Winnipeg and telling them in March, listen, my body's not responding. I don't want to do this again. I can't do it. But to do it a week before training camp, man, that's not cool. That's not cool at all.
I mean, I get what you're saying. I do. We'll talk about his legacy in a minute because I don't think this makes a difference in the long run. But I think the interesting thing about this and the timing of it, you see a few of these every year, and I think it was Justin Dunk and Drew Edwards on the 3 Down Nation podcast that said it, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense. It was the same thing with the coach out in Montreal there. You're sitting there, and you're on the cusp. You're looking at just what is about to hit you for the next 8 months straight. And that's when it hits you. That's when you realize, you know what? This is a really huge commitment that I have to basically go all in right now, or I don't. And it feels like that to me, I don't know. We don't have the chance to talk to Darian, and you might not even really give the 100% truthful answer on this. But it feels like he was looking. He has a kid now. He has this, that. He's had a great career. He's won the Grey Cup. He did the thing, and he did the thing here. I think he was just looking at it the last chance, and it was like he's looking at it, and he's like, and it hit him, and it was like, you know what? This is a very large commitment I have to make for the next 8 months, and I just don't think I'm ready for it anymore. I don't want to go through that.
But I mean, football's a year-round game.
Yeah.
I mean, he would have.
I don't necessarily mean the physical side of it. I mean like the film and the work and the practice and the day after day of, the mental grind of football more than the physical. Because I'm sure even to this day, Darian's probably still in great football shape given how well he generally keeps his body.
Right, but I mean, that the minute you signed with Winnipeg in February,
yeah, but there isn't the immediacy of the moment in February. There's like, oh yeah, I think I'm okay. I'm feeling pretty good now, and then it just hits you like a ton of bricks later.
No, but I do think there is a little more immediacy. I think if you were feeling 50-50 on that decision, you would have known to some degree in your gut. You would have known back then. You would have had a feeling of maybe I don't want to do this because you're getting playbooks the day after you sign. You're doing this. This I don't know. there's a way to do this, and the way Darian did it is not the way to do it, not the way to go out for somebody with a legacy like his.
I'm not saying it's the way he should have handled it, but I see the side of where he's coming from. This this is how I think probably some of the thought process that went through his head and how it happened. I think there's a little bit of fake news to say on both sides of what's going on in this, because as soon as he retired, the Winnipeg media is coming to the Bombers' defense like I had never seen before. That organization was leaking like crazy to try to win the PR battle on that one, and I was like, oh my god, guys, like, come on.
which again was also bush leagued by the Bombers organization, and I'll say that as a Bombers fan. You can't air your dirty laundry in such a public forum like that. Like Darren Cameron being told to stay in his lane. Darren Cameron needed to stay in his lane there. Yeah. You can't go out and slander a guy that made a decision that was right for his family. Now, is this a decision that Darian should have maybe said in February before he put pen to paper saying, hey guys, hang on, I'm in, I like the situation, give me 2 weeks? Is that
that's probably fair. That's probably fair.
You know, but for Darren Cameron and the Bombers organization and a lot of guys I respect the hell out of to come to this team's defense here on Twitter, like, that's also amateur hour. I mean, put out a one-line statement. We are surprised by Darian's retirement, but we support his decision and we're moving forward. Pardon me, that's 3 lines. I mean,
we wish him well in his future endeavors. The most cliche line anyone's ever said about anyone that's been fired or quit.
Which is hilarious because the last place I worked at, the last radio company I worked at, when somebody would quit, they would never put that line on there. When somebody was fired, it was, we wish him well in his future endeavors.
Yeah.
But I mean, so put that out, and I mean, let fans and media and people guess that maybe you're a little salty about this, about the timing of it. Don't air your dirty laundry. The Blue Bombers organization needs to pull their heads directly out of their asses, because that was such a Bush League move for them, and I can't blame. See, this is why I'm not as salty as other Bomber fans. I'm just not. I mean, if I got attacked by an organization I left, and God knows I've slammed an organization I've left.
Literally on this podcast.
Literally on this podcast, in social media, like if they want to take a shot back at me, fine, go right ahead, because I've called upon it. But, you know, there's a way of doing things as a professional organization, as somebody in the media, and it's just... they're not doing it. So good on Darian for firing back. I love seeing him fire back and tell Darren Cameron to stay in his lane. There's a right way and a wrong way. I mean, the way Darian handled this was wrong. Mm-hmm. The way the Blue Bombers handled his retirement was even extra wrong. Like Darian's timing was bad, and the Bombers' reaction was the most Bush League thing I've seen. like that is like, the way they reacted, that's like, even Junior B hockey leagues wouldn't react like that. That was, come on, guys.
Yeah, so you brought up the question earlier, and I'm curious as to why you think that a moment in time is going to suddenly change Darian Durant's legacy in the CFL.
Well, I think I'm just pissed off as a Bomber fan. I think in a year or two, I think me and Bomber fans will remember this. Will Rider fans remember this? No.
I mean, Rider fans, frankly, are loving it. They're thinking this is one of the greatest things that's Darian Durant's ever done.
100%, and that's terrific. I mean, that's
it's fair. It's fair. It's what being a fan's all about, right?
I just don't think that a guy like, I always think that. I don't even think Darian should have played in Montreal last year. Now, the haul that they got for him was fantastic. I hate seeing that weird... This goes way back. I hate seeing that weird Joe Montana playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. I hate seeing...
But do you actually ever remember that in the long run, though? Like, does anyone ever actually remember those scenarios? Like, does anyone remember Mike Modano, Detroit Red Wing? Does anyone remember Daniel Alfredson, Detroit Red Wing? Does anyone care? I mean, there's countless stories of guys going somewhere for a year, doing nothing, and then retiring. And everyone always remembers the team they basically played with their entire career.
Well, yeah, I just think Darian should have been given the chance to go out on his own terms as a Rider, and this dates back. And this is something I said on 2 and Out when I was still on the 2 and Out CFL podcast. That is something I said on that podcast, that I thought the way they handled the Durant situation, it was very New England Patriots-esque. It was the getting rid of a guy right at the right time, but sometimes you have to make an exception for a guy that means that much to your team. And Darian should have been given a chance to go out as a Rider, and it's fitting that basically the second after he announced it, his Twitter avatar is back to him at the closing of Taylor Field.
Yeah, I mean, Darian still is a very smart guy at heart. He knows now if he cozies up to Rider Nation, that's where his bread was buttered, and that's where he can continue some kind of have some kind of, cliche, some kind of story, be something still, and probably monetize it to some degree as well. Like he's being very cerebral about how he's handled this post-retirement too as well. Like let's not say that this is all warm and fuzzy feelings for Darian Durant towards Rider Nation. It's a very smart business decision by him as well to do that.
And you're right, Joel. And on that note, Don Narcisse was a very successful car salesman down in Regina. And I can tell you, Darian, if you're listening to this, we got an opening up at Oakwood Nissan. You sell 20 cars a month just by showing up.
So I think so for me, I think what happened the last year and a bit, no one's going to remember it. We're going to be at the 2021 Plaza of Honor. You and I aren't physically going to be there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, maybe we will. Maybe we'll cowboy up and get Drew to pay for tickets for that one.
I wouldn't count on it. It's honestly not something I'm really all that interested in going to overall. The 2021 Plaza of Honor thing is going to come up. Darian Durant and John Chick are going to go in because it's a slam dunk. Those two have to go in, especially together. Rob Van Stone wrote a thing about Kerry Joseph. I'm still on the fence as to whether he's actually a Plaza of Honor guy or not. I don't know. That's another discussion for another day. And it's going to, obviously, because it's a Rider event, it's going to be all about the Riders. But, 3 years from now, no one's really going to remember this. It's going to be about his career from when he started to 13 and all that. And it's just going to be a big celebration of Darian Durant's career, and his legacy is going to be what it was, no matter what happened the last 2 years here. And I think in the immediacy of the moment, a lot of people think when someone changes teams drastically or something happens, he's tarnishing his legacy. Time heals all wounds. No one really cares in the long run. Alexei freaking Yashin was at a Sens Alumni Classic game this year. Who would have ever thought that, right? Like, no one cares about these things over the course of time. It all fades. Darian Durant will be Darian Durant, and he might be he'll be one of those guys that's enshrined and will be loved forever here and probably at a lot of places across the CFL.
The only reason Yashin was at the event is because Eugene Melnick needed to sell an extra 100 tickets, and he knew that's how he would do it. Hey-o!
Well, it was at Parliament Hill, and there was only 5,000 tickets. I don't even think they were even for sale. I think they're free tickets, if I remember correctly.
Well, I screwed that up.
Yeah, so what else is new? So the question, I think, the big thing that Darian Durant's scenario has raised is how do we fix this bonus thing? Because what Darian Durant did, though morally maybe not correct, is not wrong under the current rules of the CBA. Just like cutting a guy an hour before a bonus is due isn't wrong either. So what do you do? Because both sides of this axe are wrong, but they exist right now, so there's nothing really you can do about it as it currently stands. I think I might have an answer thanks to our friend of the show, Dan Plaster, but I'm curious about what you think the solution might be to trying to fix this problem.
Well, for one, I just want to go on the record and say, I'm not one of those salty Bomber fans over the money. If you're going to give me, Joel, if you're going to give me $60,000 to come on this podcast, and then I get an offer or I decide I don't want to do it, and you've already given me the money, I'm probably going to keep the money. That's just I like money. I like money a lot. So I'm not mad at all about that because let's face it, had Durant been due a big roster bonus before April the 1st and he was on the Montreal Alouettes, that probably would have made with the release. Let's be honest here. I think both sides, I don't know what the solution is. I think there needs to be something if you cut a guy within X days of a signing bonus, or if you're, and I know why guys get signing bonuses. I don't know why teams pay them out, but to me, there needs to be some clause for the players that a roster bonus is no more than, say, 10% of your contract, right? So these guys aren't getting huge bonuses, $70,000 bonuses, $100,000 bonuses. Instead it's like, yeah, we cut you before we owed you 25 grand. Still not a class move by anybody. But, I mean, if you limited the amount that you could pay in a bonus, it's a little bit less of a sting. So let's say, again, the Darian Durant situation, you limit it to 10%. His base salary is probably what? It probably would have been around
at least 200. At least 200.
Let's call it 200.
Just for the sake of easy math.
Yeah. So let's say Darian was given 20 grand by the Bombers when he signed, and he retires, keeps the 20 grand. Is anybody bitching over 20 grand right now?
Probably not. No.
Exactly. So I think if you wrote into the CBA that bonuses are only a small percentage of the overall number of a contract, and I get it why guys do it. They like to get money. They like to get money up front.
It's taxed differently too, so that's important.
Exactly. I mean, there's always a way. There's ways around it. Pay the players a little bit more to cover their taxes, and so on and so forth, or work something out like the curlers have that portions of salary don't get taxed. But to me, that's a quick and easy solution. Hey, your contract's 10 to 20% or more can't be. You can't have a bonus bigger than 10 to 20% of the value of your contract.
Yeah, that's a decent solution. I don't know if in the CBA the players would go for that.
Probably not.
Honestly, I don't think they would. So the solution that I heard from Plaster was this. It's the problem, the biggest issue with the CFL and the salary cap is that it's cumulative over the course of the year. So your salary cap runs from Jan 1 to December 31, and it kind of gets paid out as you go throughout the course of the year, depending on. So if you get a $70,000 bonus on March 1st, that's $70,000 on that team's cap at that moment in time.
Yes.
So the solution, as he put it, and I was like, wow, why didn't I think of this? This is genius. You go to the NHL, you go to the AAV, you go to the average. So if over the course of a year, over the course of the year, this year, if he hit all his bonuses, blah, 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 Darian Durant was going to make $350,000, but he got $70,000 on March 1st. Well, on March 1st, he still got his $70,000. He retires after that. He keeps the money, doesn't go on the cap.
Right.
If he's due a roster bonus in Montreal on March 1st and he's cut on April 28th, then, or he's traded just before that, say, then he still gets his money, but the money doesn't go, the money transfers to the other team. So it's, you basically take all the money you have that a player would make in a given year and divide it by 18 for every game in the regular season, and that's that. When you get paid doesn't matter. It says this is your average salary for the year. We break it down based on the number of games over the course of a regular season that you play in, and that's your cap hit throughout the season, and that's that. There's no off season. Well, you got paid this on this day, so now this is on the cap for the rest of the year.
When I'm on summer holidays, you cannot let Dan Plaster on this podcast because he is way smarter than me, and that alone proves it.
Well, unfortunately, his current employer doesn't allow him to do outside sources, so unless he decides to leave his cushy job at the mothership, that's not going to be happening. So, John, for at least another few months, your unpaid sort of job is safe.